We made it through the pandemic. We made it through World War II. We're going to make it through this. We have enough invention, adaptability, creativity, resilience to make it through even the best or worst presidency.
I really wish that Obama or Biden was bold enough to go, hey, Bezos, why don't you take over the USPS system and create Amazon inside of our government? Why isn't Zuck, who's so good at connecting people socially, taking over education in public schools?
We should all be cheering on Donald Trump and hoping that this is the best strategy. And we need to be hopeful in our future and do everything we can to create a better one.
You're listening to the Mind Shift Podcast. My name is Erwin McManus, and I'm here with my dad, Erwin McManus. It's been a few weeks since we've done a brand new episode, so I thank you for hanging in there. We want to say thank you. And how are you doing today, Dad?
I'm doing really, really good. It's been a crazy few weeks. I've gone from LA to New York to Puerto Rico to Mexico to Greenville, South Carolina to Austin, Texas to Los Angeles with a few stops in between and in Atlanta. So it's been a crazy 2 weeks, but I'm glad to be back in LA.
Meanwhile, we've had some weird witchcraft, black magic stuff happen to our family. We've had my car got towed this morning.
I'm not talking about that.
We got our flights got messed up. We've had like personal attacks. We've had reputational attacks. We have had legal stuff that's probably going to happen, and we're having to defend ourselves. There's so much happening in the world that I don't even know what we're allowed to talk about. Trump hit tariffs, hit the whole world with tariffs. Yeah. Which I'm looking to you to break that down.
I do want to talk about
from
that.
my perspective. Trump just said, "I'm not playing Pokemon with any of you guys anymore."
I mean, the global stock markets collapsed today. All over the world.
Yes. Yeah. But and there's a really interesting Rick Rubio, Rick Rubio quote talking about this is just the world regulating. This isn't a crash. This is a readjustment. I don't know what to believe. It feels like there's a lot going on in the world. It feels like it's been a heavy few weeks. I appreciate every single friend that's reached out and sent a text and just said thank you for everything, or being a friend, for people who've been like, hey, we're praying for you, we're reaching out. But with that said, in the midst of all the chaos, there's so much to be grateful for, so much to be happy about.
Absolutely.
And it feels good to be back in LA. I can't imagine how good it feels for you, because you legitimately have been playing pinball around the United States for the last few weeks.
Yeah, I woke up in a hotel room and I had no idea where I was.
You probably don't even remember which hotel room it was.
It was the one in Greenville. I remember because I was sleeping on the left side. I know it sounds crazy, but I normally sleep on the right side because Kim sleeps on the left side. So I woke up on the left side. I thought, oh no, where's Kim? I'm looking around, and it took me a minute to realize I'm in a hotel room in Greenville and that Kim's not there. That's how much displacement. And on top of that, in Puerto Rico, I had to speak nonstop for television, radio, podcasts in Spanish. And it's not just Spanish, it's Puerto Rican Spanish that I'm having to deal with for a week. So I jump on the live Mind Shift community pod, which is so much fun.
Sunburnt to a crisp.
I didn't know how hot it was in Puerto Rico. I was only outside for maybe an hour, and then I took my sunglasses off and I realized I had raccoon eyes, so I had to go back out there and sit there without sunglasses on, just to try to even out my eyes with my face before I went on television. Yeah. So it was really embarrassing.
Needed to go get like a ski mask cover.
It was so bad.
Only your eyes are showing.
Yeah, and so then you asked me later, is my tongue swollen?
You jumped on the Mind Shift community call.
I did.
And Austin, who, we care about you so much. We're a family, we're a team. But Austin was like, hey, is Dad okay? And I was like, I don't know, because you were so hyperactive, excited. You could seem like you were so happy.
I was being Puerto Rican. I'm sorry.
But you look like crazy raccoon eyes. Your eyes were white.
I had a lisp.
You had the craziest lisp, and I thought you were having like an allergic reaction to something.
Which has happened in the past. So
yes.
It could have been possible. But what was actually happening, which is why I'm probably hyper enunciating my words right now, is that when your mouth gets used to speaking Spanish, it's really hard to move into a Germanic Anglo-Saxon language like English, because your tongue is readapted. And And so, yeah, I sounded like I had a lisp. It sounded like my tongue was swollen.
I called you and I was like, hey, Dad, because normally we're pretty sarcastic back and forth.
Yeah.
And I'm probably the more sarcastic out of the two. But I called you and I was like, hey, or I think I texted you, hey, Dad, are you doing okay? I just noticed you're talking a little funny, and I'm your son. I'm like, man, did he just have a stroke in Puerto Rico? Like, he's unwell because you were, I called the boys like, hey, this video can't go anywhere. Like, and then you literally just responded to me and goes, I've been speaking Spanish all day. I have to switch my brain back to English. My tongue is tired.
I find what's wrong with you.
But we're here now. Should we talk about some of the things, or should we not talk about the things? I'm unsure about what we should talk about.
Well, one, I love your new Battle Ready hat.
Yeah.
It's you got retro, old school, the brand new design.
But I
hat.
gave you one.
I do.
Do you still have it?
I do. I have it at home.
I wasn't sure if I had it.
No, I have it.
Okay.
But I love that because you've been throwing out an idea, which I'm going to throw out to the general audience here.
Okay.
That maybe we should do a version of either Mind Shift or Battle Ready or something else where we just focus on the Bible, where we actually talk about like deeply like spiritual, biblical things that we deal with, like theological questions, or and for that part of our audience that really builds their life on the scriptures and would love to have us talk about controversial passages in the Bible or hard to understand passages or places where people have historically disagreed. So I'd love to hear your comments. And if you're listening, would that be something that'd be interesting to you, that would be valuable to you and helpful? Because we're really open to that. And that's something you really want to do.
Well, we had talked about this because maybe now it would have been 15 years ago when you had first come to Mosaic in Hollywood. You brought Mosaic in Hollywood before it was in Pasadena and in downtown in Beverly Hills, and you brought everybody together here. You would open up the building on Saturdays, and you would do this thing called letters.
Yes.
And I think you had one or two whiteboards, and
I had
two
two whiteboards, and on one whiteboard, for the first hour, people would just come to microphones and ask questions about whatever book of the Bible we're going to focus on.
It was very, very collegiate feeling. Like people would show up in their sweats and hoodies with a backpack with their computer. This is before we replaced all the seats in the building.
Yep.
So it was like old, like theater, almost felt like a big classroom. And you put two mics in the middle of both the rows.
Yeah.
And people would just come up for an hour and just line up and ask questions.
It'd be crazy. 400 or 500 people would take their Saturday to come all day. And I remember I started with Genesis.
Go into that all day. You started at 9 or 10?
And went to like 5, I think it was. And we started with Genesis, then we did Romans, and then we did, I think, Hebrews. We went to Corinthians. I just picked.
So you would go book by book.
Book by book and say, we're going to take this entire book and we're going to ransack it. And for an hour, and people would study it before we got here, and they would come with their questions. In Romans 6, it says this. In Romans 9, it says this. And they would ask their questions, and we would write every single question. There'd be 30, 40, 50 questions that we would have on that one board. And then I would use the other board to explain the answers to all those questions. And we would literally just mark through each question. And I would say, we're not leaving until every question on this board is answered. And we would just go at it, take a little break for lunch and come back at it. And I do remember the very first one, it was Romans, and it was the night before. And your mom, Kim, said to me, "You're doing Romans tomorrow. Aren't you going to study?" And I said, "I'm using this as a personal challenge. I haven't looked at the book of Romans in maybe a year or 2 years specifically, and I want to pull the entire book out of my memory." And so I gave myself a personal challenge to be able to teach the entire book of Romans spontaneously.
And I think those statements like that are what hurts you. To be really fair, because I think what people don't realize is that you've been living in the scriptures for 40 years now, 42 years now, since you had a moment of conversion, a moment where you gave life to Jesus. Yeah. And so for maybe 30 of those years, I mean, for probably the first 15, 20, you were pretty much only reading books in and around the scriptures.
Yeah, I spent a decade studying the Bible and everything about the Bible.
And most of my childhood memories of you were if we were at a park or we were at, a pool or something. Like you had a laptop open with an old software that broke it down in every language, every passage, every version, now it's great because we have it. Craig Rochelle hooked us up and put it in the Bible app.
Yeah, and thank God for
thank God for Craig.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Bobby. I mean, those two guys have changed the world.
But like you had that, and you would just sit with a stack of binders and books,
and that was the second decade.
And that was the second decade, and you would just break him down. And so I think when people hear that, they go, well, he didn't really study. He doesn't really care. And like, no, you were deeply invested, so much so. And you also have a unique set of skills of like this massive, incredibly detailed memory. But those letters were amazing because I was living in New York at the time. And so I think you guys would live stream them on YouTube. And so I would go and I would sit in my apartment in New York on Saturdays. And I think because it was 3 hours.
It was actually just a private link.
It was a private link. Yeah. I think that, And then it would go from like noon for me, because it was 9 for you, till like 8 p.m. And I would just sit there and just take notes and watch. And so we've talked about doing something like that on a podcast forum.
Yeah. Which I think would be really interesting. And I don't usually talk about it a whole lot because there's a reason why I never talked about my education as much as because I didn't want people to feel that my education is what gave me my insights. I really believe my insights come from a very intimate, mystical journey with Jesus. But I do have an education. I just hide it, Yeah,
and what is that education?
Yeah, well, I have kind of a,
No, just what is it?
I went to Elon University, studied philosophy. Then I went to University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and studied psychology. Then I went to Southwestern Theological Seminary and got a master's in theology. Then I was awarded a doctorate in humane letters by Southeastern University.
And then you transferred your master's degree over to SEU because that was the school that you and Mom met at before, Southwestern.
Yeah.
And didn't they basically say that women shouldn't be in leadership?
Yeah. So once they said women shouldn't be in leadership, I wanted to shift my degree to another university because I just couldn't agree with that.
Also, you're just such a ride or die for Mom.
Yeah.
That you were like, you disrespect my wife.
Yeah.
I'm going to never talk about you ever again.
Yeah. But I've also like created 3-4 different master's degrees for different universities and created several doctoral programs for different universities.
Great universities.
So, so I don't know how it counts when you're not getting the degree, you're creating the degree. But that was a lot of fun too. So, and I studied Hebrew in its original languages from the University of North Carolina.
You got trapped in that.
Yeah, that was an accident.
That's the story that I grew up hearing, but can you so when you ended up enrolling in, what happened with your Hebrew degree?
I came to faith in college and I was a philosophy. I'd already finished every course, I think, in philosophy that was required for my major by the time I was a sophomore.
Okay.
So I had nothing but electives ahead of me.
Yeah, okay.
And then I thought, okay, I'm just going to add psychology to my philosophy degree. So I started taking psychology at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, under one of the best psychology programs in the world. But I had still a lot of electives. So I saw a class on Hebrew, the language. And I thought, I want to learn how to speak and read Hebrew so I can study the Bible in the original languages. But I didn't notice, I'm not a very detailed person sometimes, and I didn't notice it was a PhD course, not a BA course. And so it wasn't even a master's course, it was a PhD course.
Was it actually?
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah, so there's maybe 8 to 10 to 12 students in that class. I mean, it's really small, right? So I walk in the first day, and the professor, who's Israeli, so it gives you a little clue of how serious they're going to be. Yeah. And he just has everybody open up their Hebrew text, and they all start reading.
Because most of the people in that class would have been linguistic.
They were all majors in Hebrew as a language.
Yeah.
They were PhD students, so they could all read fluently. And I'm sitting there going, how's everybody starting here?
I was 101 at the...
I thought this was Hebrew 101 and everyone's fluent and they're reading everything. And when it got to me, I said, I thought this was an introductory class to Hebrew, and I didn't know this was a PhD course. And so I, after the course was over, being utterly humiliated, I went to the registrar's office And I tried to drop the class, and they told me you can't drop the class without the professor's signature.
Yeah.
So the class picked up, I guess, 2 days later. So I show up in class, but early, and I go to the professor.
Like, can you release me from this class?
Yeah, I have this one registered. I need you to sign it. I'm dropping out of the class. I can't read Hebrew. I need a different class. And he goes, Mr. McManus, sit down. And I sat down. He wouldn't sign it. And when the class came in, he goes, class, we have a problem. And he was great. I love this man.
No, I love the story. Keep
he
going,
goes, we have a problem. He goes, Mr. McManus would like to leave us. And we have a decision to make as a class. We will either release Mr. McManus to go on and live his life, or we will adopt Mr. McManus, and as a class, we will teach him how to read and understand Hebrew. And the whole class adopted me as their mascot, as their pet. And they said, we do not give him permission to leave. We will adopt him. So I spent that year studying Hebrew, being mentored and tutored by this extraordinary Hebrew professor and this incredibly gracious group of people. And the Hebrew just became so natural and inherent to me that when I got to my master's courses at Southwestern, I stepped into a Hebrew class under what was known as the hardest Hebrew professor in the entire system across America. And he came to me and said, I think you should specialize and major in Hebrew. Your understanding of Hebrew is really elevated. And I just couldn't imagine what a life as a Hebrew scholar would have been. So, but I was so complimented.
You took it as a huge, you had a great experience at Southwestern. And you took it as a huge compliment.
And it wasn't just that the language became accessible to me. I lived inside the Hebrew mind. And I remember when I took another Hebrew course under a Hebrew scholar, there were like 500 to 1,000 students in his class. He was super popular. And he asked everyone a question on Genesis chapters 1 through 3. And he said, what is the purpose of Genesis 1 through 3? What is the writer trying to say? And he would have students stand up and they'd yell the answer. And he'd go, great answer, completely wrong. And oh, good try, sit down. That wasn't even a good try. And he was just mocking everyone. He was like a stand-up comic. And my heart's pounding and pounding. And after everyone had tried, he goes, anyone else want to try? What is the writer's intention in Genesis 1 through 3? And I stood up, I raised my hand. He goes, all right, who are you? And I said, my name's Erwin McManus. And he goes, so what is the purpose of Hebrews 1 through 3? And I said, why the Sabbath is holy. And he paused and he said, class, we have in our midst a Hebrew scholar. He goes, that is the purpose of Hebrews 1 through 3, the story of why the Sabbath is holy. Mm. And I was able to give that answer because of being inside of the Hebrew mind. Mm. And I'm so grateful. I didn't know what I was being prepared for. I didn't know that I would become a pastor. I didn't know that I would write books about our spiritual journey. I didn't know that I would be a spokesman for Jesus. I had no idea. I was just trying to learn for me.
Yeah.
And then when I got to seminary, I started studying Greek. And
wait, hold on. I don't want to go into that.
Okay.
No, but with Hebrew, I actually didn't know that second part. I didn't know about the Genesis 1 through 3.
It's kind of cool.
It is so cool.
I never tell that story.
No, but I think it's really special because I think you're so casual about, your education or your background. I think you're also your own person. You've had an entire career. You've had multiple careers. You're in all of the things. Mm-hmm. And so I think people just, I think there's a lot of people who would put the PhD first, right? With an honorary PhD. And you just were like, we're never going to talk about it. And I've always found that interesting about you and with you. But I bring that up because I'm just like, it just hit me. We were in Mexico at some point and we were on a trip at some point, and I basically was like, man, maybe we need to talk more about the scriptures and just have, whether it's a separate podcast or something that, even if it just lives inside of the same channel of Mind Shift, but we just talk about God and the scriptures. And and we can ask questions and open it up for other people. And we've dreamed about this during COVID. I think we were like talking about if we, once everything opens back up again, how would we do this? How would we do letters now?
Yeah. What's funny is that, even as I've stepped so much into the business world, and this past week I was doing an event in Austin with Brendan Bouchard and Ed Milet, and sometimes you think, oh, you're in a different space, right? But right before I walk on stage, Brendan Bouchard, who's really like in a beautiful discovery stage of his own faith and expressing it, he said, hey, you can talk about your faith on stage if you want. Like, he was like prodding me, like, because I was like, please do.
Yeah.
He goes, because, there's a lot of people out there that have a faith.
Yeah.
And I normally try to keep a line clear or anything like that. But about halfway through my
well, hold on, let's break that down real quick. Because you say line clear, but I don't know that I've ever heard you not talk. I've never heard you give a talk without talking about God.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, you always, whether it's just a personal
it's so true.
Combo.
I guess in my mind I'm going, I'm here to help people solve this problem in their life.
Yeah. I get,
I'm not here with a subversive agenda. I'm not trying to manipulate the room. If they ask me to come and talk to them about, how to create a corporate culture, I'm going to talk about that.
You really try to be a good steward of the ask.
Yeah.
If they've asked you to talk about mental breakthrough, that you come in and talk about mental breakthrough, you'll talk about spirituality, but it's not the core focus of that. Yeah. Okay.
But what's funny is about halfway through, I said something, hey, I'm just going to out myself. I'm a pastor.
Yeah.
And the room erupted in applause. Kind of caught me off guard. Like, they were just so excited. And it was just an interesting thing. And by the end of the talk, I was able to, even just talk about my relationship with Jesus in that moment. And you could just feel the openness in the room. And I just love the fact that if you're relevant in the room, when you talk about Jesus, Jesus is relevant in the room. Jesus is only irrelevant in the room when you're irrelevant in the room. If you really connect with the room, people are just so open to whatever you share with them because they connect to the authenticity. They may not agree with you, but they trust you.
I love that. I mean, I'm really fascinated by this, and I would love to see. One thing or not, there's a bunch of things, but I guess what's coming across my mind is, where do we go with Mindshift?
Yeah.
We've talked about this. We initially transferred the name over from Battle Ready to Mindshift when you released the book, and it felt like the natural thing to talk about internal breakthroughs and mental breakthroughs. And not that we're trying to transition this, but we want to always be zooming in and zooming out about the things that we care about and the things that we talk about. And so, we've been kind of throwing this out. So if you're interested in that, if you're listening, just let us know. Go to YouTube, comment, or go to Instagram and comment.
Yeah, I think for me, a huge part of what made this environment fun for me is there are a lot of things I like talking about because there's a lot of things I think about.
Yeah.
But whenever I talk about anything that is outside of, quote, specifically faith, people get really upset and go, a pastor shouldn't be talking about that. But the way my personality is built is the moment you tell me a pastor shouldn't be talking about that, I feel like, why? Are we like dumb?
Yeah.
Do we lack like intelligence in any other arena in life? And so it makes me want to talk about it more and prove that actually we can be thoughtful.
So how do you feel when people try to put pastors in a box and go, a pastor shouldn't be talking about those things?
Yeah, I think what I find is that people try to project their expectations of your life on you. And I'm like, why? And it's fascinating because it's always with an exception. When someone says, pastor shouldn't be talking about that, but when it's a subject you care about, and when I'm on your side, you're like, go, pastor, you should be talking about that. And, and so the moment the political position aligns with the person, that's what it means to be courageous as a pastor. But the moment their position disagrees, you shouldn't be talking about that. It's not appropriate. So for some people, if I say Doge is great, everybody who loves Doge is going to go, I'm so glad you have courage.
Yeah.
And everyone who hates Doge is going to be saying, a pastor shouldn't be talking about that. But if I say Doge is evil, there's going to be all these conservatives that will say, pastor shouldn't be talking about this stuff. And all the liberals are going, finally a pastor with courage. So the truth is, when people go, a pastor shouldn't be talking about it, what you actually mean is, I don't want you to disagree with me.
Okay, so this is perfect transition into what you were talking about kind of off camera.
Yes.
We were talking about the tariffs, we're talking about Trump, we're talking about Doge, we're talking about all the things. It feels like we're in unique territory.
Yes.
It's a very toxic terrain as of late.
There are landmines in every direction.
In every direction. It's like that old school game Minesweep. Do you remember that? You used to play like on the phone or the computer where you like click a button and hope to God there's not a mine. It would unlock all the different boxes. But it feels like now, especially now, any which direction, more than ever, it just causes chaos. And we talked about this a little bit about the Tesla stuff, about how people are like rebranding their cars and that whole thing. But with the tariffs, what do you think about them? How do you feel about them? We've been getting more and more heat being here in Hollywood from people coming into the building going, you know,
coming at me Sunday morning.
I got cussed out by an old lady who didn't realize I was your son. And I know I talked about that a couple episodes ago, but I laughed because like, oh, when I realized she didn't know that I was your son, I was like, oh yeah, he crazy up there. Like,
But this Sunday morning, after the first gathering, somebody drove up their car pulled up right at the doors
parking lot,
to start trying to protest.
Yeah.
And as people are coming out.
Yeah.
So we're in the heat of it all the time. So here's like, I want to say something big picture before I go to tariffs. My big picture thing is I actually don't usually have an intense passion for a position. I love pointing out hypocrisy and distortion of truth. And so a lot of times before the pandemic, when we would talk, I think I came across way more liberal because I felt like a lot of the conservative talking points were deceptive, dishonest, and I actually felt like a lot of pastors who supported the Republican Party in the first Trump administration early on were not consistent to their ideals and their values. I just like calling it out when I see it.
Why did you feel that? You don't have to give names or any, but like, could you just maybe refer to some more specific things?
Because when Clinton was running for president, every Christian pastor was like, he's not moral enough and doesn't have enough integrity to be president. We're never going to vote for someone who, you know, had an affair.
Is this first term or second term?
When the whole Monica Lewinsky thing happened like that. So Christians were, you know, so adamant that it was all character-based. When it comes to Trump, all of a sudden character doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if he was a womanizer. It doesn't matter if he's been married many times. It doesn't matter if he crossed inappropriate lines with women because his policies matched. And so
his policies forwarded their agenda.
Yeah. And so I felt like pastors were hypocritical. They changed their standard for which they voted for people and supported people. And you should then go, okay, we've changed our value system. We don't really care who the person is. We care what policies they support. And like, because I'm okay as long as you hold to your integrity and you know, but then when you're changing the rules of the game and still acting like it's spiritual, and it made me nervous. I would hear pastors of tremendous influence say Donald Trump is the anointed one. He's like a second Messiah.
I was hoping you'd bring that up.
And I was in a room before a TV show where they were all at dinner saying Donald Trump is just like Cyrus, the king who was a pagan king who God anointed, and God has anointed and chosen Donald Trump. And I was like tapping out, going, "This room is insane. Like this is not the movement of Jesus. This is Christianity as a political religion." So I came across very liberal because I felt the inconsistency there needed to be addressed. During the pandemic, I felt myself moving. My hands were moving in the wrong direction because I was moving further to the right in terms of I felt like the inconsistencies about COVID and the quarantine and the origins of the COVID virus, that the left was the one lying and the narrative was false. And so then people going, wait a minute, you're changing. I don't think I'm changing. I don't think I went from being liberal to conservative to liberal. I think I attack falsehood where I see it and inconsistency. And I go, make your own choices, but realize this argument should be deconstructed. And that's kind of what I want to do with the tariffs.
Okay. I'm into it.
Yeah, because
Well, okay, wait, hold on.
Okay.
Before we get to the tariffs, let's lay down a little bit of a structure because I think I was more vocal about from day
you were.
one. I walked into your and mom's house when did he first get elected? Was it Trump? When did Trump first get elected? 2016. I remember walking into your house, and I think you and during the presidential stuff, you guys always have it on the TV, and you guys are always in and out and cooking, whatever. And you guys have a very open door. We'll pop in and out, me and Mariah. So I was popping in, and I was like, man, that guy's gonna win. And that was when I think he was going after Jeb Bush and Ricky Rubio and all those guys. And Ricky Rubio. And so I keep calling him Ricky. I'm not sure why. And so I remember going right off the bat going, that guy's going to win. And mom was like, why? Why do you think that? And I was like, because just the way he's able to just own the mic.
You knew Trump was going to win.
I knew he was going to win.
Day one.
And there was no spiritual belief. I was just like a gut feeling. I was like, instinct, he's going to win.
Right. That's why I respected your position, because you never had this false kind of spirituality of like, well, I only vote for this person because he's this way. Yeah. You're just going, this guy's charismatic. He says what he means. He has a level of magnetism. He's going to win.
Yeah, I was like, and I remember, and I think you came home a little bit after me, and you were like, well, why do you think he's going to win? And I was like, I don't know. The thing he could lose over is the bullying thing. Yeah. Because he was starting to,
He was such a bully.
He was such a bully.
But he was good at it.
He was good at it. Yeah. He was great at branding.
And people don't realize he bullied, but he's also funny.
And it wasn't just bullying. It was like roasting.
He was roasting everyone, and there is a psychological nuance difference, because we're used to people being roasted, but we don't like people being bullied. And when he moved too much to the bullying side, he lost votes. I mean, I actually think Trump beat himself when he lost the election.
That second election,
If Trump had just learned how to be kind, he would have swept that second election.
So the thing for me that was bizarre in the first run was the guys that I look up to, these pastors who were amazing. They're still amazing people. It doesn't discredit their history of goodness and greatness, and even the ones who've made mistakes. But it was just odd hearing these guys go, this guy's chosen by God. He's like the second coming of, the person who's going to bring us to a Christian nation. Yeah. And it was very bizarre to me. Yeah. And you felt the same way. I felt the same. It just felt gross. The Newsmax stuff felt disingenuous. It felt unintelligible. It felt gross. And then the people who were secretly supporting, who just wouldn't say anything publicly, I was like, okay, wait, so you really do support this guy, but then you don't have the balls to say it out loud. This feels weird. But also, I understand that, because I've had a lot of great conversations with people who were like, no, I just couldn't, because my industry would literally never hire me again. Yeah. Or all my friends would go, we're not going to fund you anymore. So I do understand that.
That's not hypocrisy. That's economics to me are more important than politics.
Right.
And my job is more important than my opinion.
And now 10 years later, 8 years later, I look at it and go, no, that was just knowing what pitches to swing at and what battles to fight, right? And that was wisdom and more like maybe a calmness. But I think that was the harder thing. What changed in that third election, I guess, in the second term now? Because it feels different. Yeah. And was it the two assassination attempts? Like what caused that shift?
There's a lot there, but I'm going to say this, and
and you can jump into tariffs.
Edit
whatever you
this.
Want. Okay.
Last week I was on a conversation in the South with pastors who were in a conversation with some of the most influential pastors of massive churches, and they were telling him,
who?
I'm not going to say.
Okay.
They're telling this pastor.
Right. I wasn't sure if you were okay. Yeah.
If he wanted to raise a lot of money for his church, he needed to come out hardcore Republican. Yeah. And hardcore conservative, because, quote, that's where the money is. Yeah. And what's painful is that that's true.
Yeah, we've realized that.
Yeah, and and because they were shocked where this began, they were shocked how small our budget is. Yeah. And I said, hey, we're in the middle of LA. It's dominantly a liberal environment. Liberals aren't going to give a lot of money to the church. It's just real life, And so being in LA for 35 years, our budget is still incredibly small. And if it wasn't even for our family supplementing the church wouldn't even exist.
Yeah.
And
it's we talked about this on the phone the other day. I was like, hey, we got to stop talking about how hard it is to raise money in LA, because I think, one, it makes us unattractive, but I was like, but if it wasn't for probably 10 families, 5 of them who don't go to Mosaic on a week because they don't even live in LA, the other 5 who live around LA and pop in and out and give generously, Mosaic would not be funded. And we're not attractive enough to the denominations because you're a really free thinker. So the SBC doesn't know what to do with that.
They think I'm a Buddhist. So.
They think you're insane. But every 10 years they'll put you on the cover of something, and which we're gonna start charging you guys for. But we've talked a lot about this because I said, like, just play the game. You're libertarian. You like both. I
just can't play that game.
Okay, so talk to us about the tariffs.
Okay, so that's a part of it, but I think this podcast the value is that you don't have to agree with us. And I hope you stay with us when we violently disagree with each other, because what we're really looking at is the thinking process. And if your thinking process can go through the gauntlet of the right questions and you still disagree with us, it's great. But I was looking at the tariffs, and and I'm saying this on the day where the global stock markets crashed. I mean, they all dropped like 10% everywhere. Every country is in chaos right now. All right. So Trump has disrupted the global economic system. But I want to step back and go, wait a minute. But who are his allies and who are his enemies? Because if you look at tariffs, Democrats have been pro-tariffs forever.
The clips from Pelosi, the clips from Sanders are insane.
And even historically, presidents. And
right.
If you were unaware of what was going on, and you were simply asked the historical question, what president would you predict would raise tariffs on other countries? You'd say Democrats, because they want to protect the blue-collar worker. They want to protect the industries that our lack of tariffs have not protected. Democrats have always said they're for tariffs. Republicans have been against tariffs. They would never have initiated tariffs. They want to protect corporations. They want to protect the free
business.
Trade markets, all that sort of thing. So what Trump is doing is actually a Democratic strategy, not a Republican strategy. So you would think the Republicans would be up in arms saying, what are you doing? But they've, they lost their power. They have to do what he says. And you'd think the Democrats would be cheering Trump on, saying, we didn't know it. We elected our guy. We elected the president who's going to implement the most democratic ideology possible. But doesn't happen. Why? Because it's Trump doing it. So it's very interesting, right? Or maybe the Democrats pretended to be pro-tariffs, but they never implemented them because they've had quite a few Democratic presidents who did not do it. It's so great to be for something and never do it, because people are voting for you because you say you're for it. And they're not voting for the other guy because he says he's against it. But here's the other aspect of this. The Democrats have said that Trump is creating an oligarchy, which is a big word for rich people running the country or running the world, which Republicans and controversy theorists and have always said we're being run by an oligarchy anyway, right?
But what they're really doing by labeling him as someone trying to create an oligarch is by saying he's becoming the next Putin. He's turning America into Russia. Right. That's the sub narrative.
So the same people who would say, no, George Soros has never had undue impact on the Democratic Party and the global economic system are now saying Elon Trump is having undue influence on the White House and global economic systems. And the argument has been Elon Musk is getting rich off of Doge. Elon Musk is getting richer. That's his entire motivation. And the argument has been Donald Trump is in the pocket of billionaires. Look at Bezos and Zuckerberg and all of them there. You see all the billionaires that once were Democrats are now lining up with him. So here's an interesting thing. I'm going to pull this up because I think this is just fascinating. If Donald Trump is actually for billionaires, he's doing the worst job in human history. Because here's the list of how much money the top billionaires have lost in the last month. Elon Musk has lost $130 billion. So if Donald Trump has Elon Musk there so Elon can make more money, his strategy has absolutely collapsed. Jeff Bezos has lost $45 billion. Mark Zuckerberg just lost $28 billion. Bill Gates, he's not doing as badly. He only lost $3.3 billion. The only billionaire making money is Warren Buffett. He just made $12 billion, and Warren explains he only invests American. So every billionaire who isn't investing only American is losing his shirt. It goes on. Larry Ellison has lost $42 billion. Larry Page lost $34 billion. I mean, just go all the way down this list. Michael Dell has lost $36 billion. And you just go on and on. Steve Ballmer, my man, the Clippers, lost $19 billion. So if Trump is in the pocket of billionaires and if he's developing strategies to make billionaires richer, then why are all the billionaires losing their shirts through Trump's policies? The Democrats, who've always said billionaires are evil, that the billionaires are the problem, they should be cheering Donald Trump because they finally have a president that's stripping billionaires of their billions. That's more than, $200 billion that has been lost by the richest men in the world. Why aren't the Democrats cheering and the Republicans mourning? And what's fascinating to me is that Donald Trump has actually made policy decisions that have hurt billionaires because he believes it will help the middle class. On top of that, with the crash of the stock market, which is kind of terrifying, I'm feeling the bends, on that. Yesterday, your mom was asking me, have we lost all of our retirement? And I think the best estimate is that the entire stock market crash affects the top 8% of the wealthiest people in the country. So even with the crash of the stock market, it's not hurting the everyday person. Where the danger comes is in inflation, where the everyday person is going to have a difficult time if inflation actually becomes a long-term sustained reality, which, by the way, is the result of not Trump's policies, but of the Biden policies that allowed our debt to go so out of control that you have to find some way to manage it. And so I'm not even saying Trump's strategy is right or smart or good. I am not enough of an economist to really know all the nuances of it. What I do know is this. He's clearly not making choices that help billionaires. He's clearly not making choices that hurt the middle class and the working class person. His intention seems to be clearly to help the economic stability of this nation. And what is, to me, interesting is that he's being attacked for raising tariffs, but he hasn't tariffed any country more than they've tariffed us. Why aren't we angry with all of our allies who have been putting tariffs on us for decades, not allowing our goods into their countries, while our government has cowered to all of those nations and allowed their products to come in without any tariffs at all? We should be mad at Europe and Australia and Canada and Japan and Vietnam and China and all of these nations that have been unfairly tariffing us and putting us in an economic deficit. So I'm just looking at this just as an objective person going, I don't know how it's going to damage my life. I don't know how it's going to have a long-term effect on us economically. But to say that Trump is serving billionaires and is not helping the working class is just untrue. If it doesn't work, it's not because his intention wasn't good. And then on top of all of that, I look at this whole reciprocal tariff thing. We're not even reciprocal. And then people asking, why aren't we tariffing Russia? It's because we don't do trade with Russia. And then asking, oh, how stupid, he put tariffs on a little island with only penguins. I don't know if you know that.
Which island?
I can't even remember the name of the island, but he actually put a tariff on an island with only penguins, and all the late night comedy people saying, they're tariffing penguins. But there's a reason for that. It's because he knows oligarchs will choose that island and use that as their tax loophole. So he tariffs an island where there are no people so that you don't have a way of escaping the tariffs. And so sometimes I'm like going, you may hate this guy and you may hate his policies, but if you actually spin that he's stupid, you're underestimating him. So anyway, that is my perspective on tariffs, the stock market, the economy, the global trade relationships. And so I want to see how this plays out. But what I do know is status quo was going to drive our nation into the ground. And he may go down in history as the singular person who realigned the economic balance of global trade. Or he'll go down in history as creating the greatest depression we've ever had. But it's going to be a great one.
Yeah.
It'll be greater than the Great Depression.
I don't know if that's funny, but I don't know if you're laughing out of joy or
No, I'm laughing because everything he says is great.
Yeah, yeah. No, I know.
Says it'd be greater than the Great Depression.
Yeah. I do think, I think the reality is that we've woken up from whatever crazy dream we've been in, right? And that we're realizing that we're in more of a nightmare than we've been. And we've talked about this. When you start giving everyone a stimulus check, multiple stimulus checks over years, it just does not create a healthy economy. It doesn't create a healthy system. And we saw the ramifications of that, right? I'm sure there's so many positive stories, and there was so much abuse and mismanagement of that. But our neighborhood became drug infested. It became completely overrun with gangs and shootings and drug dealing and homelessness and people robbing cops. Like it wasn't just the police that were considered the bad guys. It was the bad guys were so unafraid of law enforcement. They were robbing the police. It was a Grand Theft Auto video game for a while in major cities. And we definitely felt that here in LA. And, and we feel it. We drove out to, Mosaic has a new campus in Calabasas.
Yeah.
You feel how different it is out there than it is in the city.
Yeah.
You go to South Pass, Mosaic and South Pass, you feel how different South Pass is because it's a well-run little town, and you just see these other kind of municipalities in and around Los Angeles who are just run so much more efficiently than the greater Los Angeles County. Yeah. And LA's massive. It's so hard to run a city well, but I don't know that that's being achieved. And so I think whatever. I think we're in a place now where I hope just things get better. I hope things become more hopeful. Yeah. I don't care what you believe in politically. I just hope that you ask big questions. I hope that you question everything. I hope that you poke holes in people's statements and actually do the research. For me, we talk about this all the time. It's really hard to know what's real, what's true. Yeah. I do appreciate at least the undertones or the obvious nature of them posting everything to X, Doge daily posting to their website, Elon posting, Trump posting, Rubio. You just have these. I don't know if we've ever lived in an era where there's more transparency or openness. Whether we know if it's true or not, we do have an idea when people go, hey, we just discovered this. Here's all the findings. Here's all the discovery. Here's an open page with the link with all the documents. And I think it's a scary reality because with great power comes great responsibility, to quote the great Alfred. But we live in an era where information's flowing more freely. And so it becomes unique because when in history have we had access to people in countries that are tens of thousands of miles away, understanding what their daily life looks like? We've never experienced this ever, right? And so with that, there is a lot of fear, a lot of chaos, a lot of anxiety, and I guess my prayer, my hope for people is that they don't give up in these seasons. When things go bad or things get dark, that we still have hope and we remain hopeful. And that remembering that it's I think there is this backlash of nationalism, right? And I feel, I don't know how I feel about it, because I'm like, no, if you're American, I want you to be proud to be American. But what does that mean to be proud of being American? You have to be proud of the actions your country is making. And the unique part of living in this country is that the danger of this country is that there's a two-party system. The great thing is that there's a multiple-party system that's stuck in a two-party system that needs to break away and become more open. We need bigger thoughts. We need bigger thinkers. We need people who are bringing more to the table. It's insane that we as a country will attack great thinkers like Elon and go, he wants to be the dictator of America. He's the true leader of America. He's just trying to steal power. And I'm like, or maybe he's just this super genius that actually wants to bring good. Like, why do we impose nefarious, intent? And I'm going, why, when we had such great liberal minds, all of these big billionaires would have been Democrats for the last while. Why weren't they getting tapped on the shoulder to go, Amazon, Bezos, USPS sucks. Like, we talked about this 10 years ago. I was like, I really wish that Obama or Biden was bold enough to go, hey, Bezos, why don't you take over the USPS system and create Amazon inside of our government?
Idea, actually.
Why isn't Zuck, who's so good at connecting people socially, taking over education in public schools and creating he created Meta glasses, such a unique technology, right? And why isn't Meta and Apple teaming up to make every kid in every underprivileged neighborhood in the world, give that to them? Don't go fund transgender plays in Scotland and like transgender freaking LGBTQ like propaganda in Colombia.
In Guatemala, yeah.
Which we all know is just them paying cartels. Like this, let's not be stupid. And why aren't they creating the best education? I was listening to an interview with Scott Galloway, who's very liberal and very democratic, very strong in that, and he's massively wealthy, really become bold with his opinions. And I had sent you an all-in podcast with Chamath and Friedberg and those guys, and they're all embedded in the government now. And those guys have given to both sides, because I think when you're at that level of wealth, you kind of just need to play well with others.
You put your money in both.
But Scott Galloway was doing an interview where he breaks down. He goes, we should absolutely stop funding these Ivy League schools that have 40 plus billion in endowments.
It's ridiculous.
But the government's giving them billions more. Yeah. But then they reduce the freshman class every year. And he's like, if you're not increasing your intake, you should not be allowed to receive government funding, where you essentially become a privatized state-funded school, and then you're hoarding some of the brightest professors and minds because you can afford to pay them because we're giving you all this money, but then you're hoarding education. And I'm going, we all know that when you become more educated, you bring education into every society or every class system, and from the lower blue collar to the upper class, like, the upper class knows this. You send your kids to Ivy League schools, more is the world's going to open up for them. Relationships, communal spaces. And so you know that is the thing that changes the game for society. Why aren't we bringing that to our inner city neighborhoods? Why aren't we bringing that to the projects? Free minds, right? But no, we keep people attached at the hip to the government and create incentivized programs to create government dependency, and that destroys our society. And no one's asking those questions, I don't feel. And I feel like we now are at the precipice of someone who's crazy enough and bold enough, and maybe he's going, I'm probably going to die doing this, so let me just try doing it as best as I can. Finally, someone's taking risks and bringing intelligent people into the fold.
Yeah, and it's one of those odd things that when something exists already, you actually think it inherently has value. And when something new is being brought in, you think it's inherently suspicious. But it was when Jimmy Carter was president in the 70s that he created the Department of Education. And what's crazy to me, because that's when I'm in high school, all right? So I go through school without a Department of Education. Then Jimmy Carter becomes president. And so when I'm in school, we have the #1 educational system in the world. Then they create the Department of Education, and in those 50 years, we're now at the bottom of the scale in terms of the world's educational systems. And yet you would think, how do we exist without a Department of Education? But the reality is we always existed without one. Now we finance a system where 50% of the employees are not teachers. So teachers are not getting paid. They're not getting the benefit of it. The Department of Education just became a bureaucracy that actually stifled the educational process. But it feels scary to get rid of it because when you're used to having it, well, what would happen when we don't have it? Well, let's look back. We were doing awesome as a nation without it.
Yeah.
But it's almost as if government has this instinctive need to consume everything. And if we allow government to go without restraint, every aspect of the human experience will be controlled by the government. And so when you have a political reset, that's why, look, when I was young, I would have guessed it would have been the Democrats that would have done this, that the Democrats would have created an economic reset. But what they wanted was to move towards socialism, where the economic reset was a modernized version of European socialism. And frankly, I think Americans rejected it and said, we do not trust European socialism. We do not think this is what will make the nation better. And because with a European socialism, we also integrated a social reengineering where the basic views of humanity were no longer true. Marriage was no longer between a man and woman. There was no longer two sexes, male and female. Everything began moving into an integration of socialism and social reengineering. And the Republicans basically said, no traditional values are inherently what makes a nation great and healthy. And with that, we're also going to choose unexpected economic values. I would have never expected this economic strategy from a Republican. So we're in an interesting intersection right now as a culture and a society. And I love what you said earlier. We just need to have hope in the future. I don't know how this is all going to play out, but I do know if we hang in there, we're going to be okay. And that we have the strength to make it through. We have enough invention, adaptability, creativity, resilience to make it through even the best or worst presidency. We made it through the pandemic. We made it through the Biden administration. We made it through the Nixon administration. We made it through World War II. We're going to make it through this, no matter how it plays out. Best case scenario, we should all be cheering on Donald Trump and hoping that this is the best strategy. No one should be like Tim Walz celebrating the demise of Tesla. We need to be celebrating the success of American companies and American ingenuity and American genius. And we need to be hopeful in our future and do everything we can to create a better one.
Yeah. Wow. I'm tired.
We went there today. Yeah. Oh, wow. We've been going an hour.
Yeah. And I think my greatest fear is that in 4 years, when we go to the next elections, that we're going to forget the mismanagement of Newsom and Karen Bass in California and in Los Angeles. We're going to forget the stupidity and the foolish nature. And actually, to be honest, I think Tim Walz is evil. I don't know if he's evil by choice or by his... It seems like he's just an idiot, but he says and does things that are so disgusting in nature that I am mortified and actually just astonished that was a governor in Minnesota. Like, that's insanity to me. And Newsom,
he was the candidate for vice presidency of the United States
under one of our worst candidates of all time. It was crazy. They had to find someone dumb because who was going to run with her? But Walz is unique because I'm like, you obviously have to be intelligent enough to run for governor.
Yeah.
But putting tampons in male bathrooms in high schools and middle schools, like, I just don't understand that. But with all that to say, we're moving on. We're moving forward. We'll talk about new things next time. We have to tell the story about the African black magic. We have to tell the story about the car getting towed. Life has been crazy.
Yeah. So today we kind of went big picture because I wanted to talk about tariffs.
You did.
So,
and I love it.
You know, I have opinions, I have thoughts, I have perspectives, and we're going to give them here on Mindshift.
And I'm sorry, I'm not sorry. See you next week.
All right.
Subscribe, rate, and review. Follow us on Instagram. We love you guys. Join the Mindshift community where we're going to wild out more on some private conversations. Love you guys. See you next week.